I'm going to start with just the process of lessons learned first of all. Does anybody recognise things on this slide? Anybody see lessons learned and actually reads finger pointing? Anybody been to a lessons learned session where it's got a bit heated? Or maybe the opposite. There's some subliminal message has got round. Look, if you don't point the finger at me, I won't point the finger at you, and then nobody brings anything. Who works at an organisation, or who's represented an organisation where you do one project at a time, then you finish it, then you have a rest, and then you start the next one? If there's anybody, can I have a job, please? Don't look at me like that, Richard. The reality is we're all busy, and when you come to do a lessons learned at the end of a big project, everybody's moved on. They're all doing a new project. That's where their head is. They can't remember what happened in the old project. A little bit of audience participation. I won't pick on anybody, just a show of hands. Who does New Year's resolutions? Who does New Year's resolutions and manages to get them to be still intact by the end of January? Anybody? Nobody. I was going to ask if anybody does multiple New Year's resolutions, but let's go further. Who could imagine doing 60 New Year's resolutions and then trying to get 60 people to all buy in to 60 New Year's resolutions, and you're not, and they're not going to be intact for a month, but the whole of your working life, or at least while you're at that organisation? That's what we do with lessons learned sometimes. If you have a particularly big project, loads of challenges, it's one of those where it did get a bit heated, it all came on the table, you then try and learn 60 things. It's impossible. And where do you document it? Do you write up some minutes, send it around an email, nobody reads, put it in a log, nobody can find? The reality at Fordway in the past is we've been guilty of all of these things. Other organisations where I've worked, the same. When I've had the privilege, inverted commas, of being invited to a lessons learned of a customer, seen these things too. So what do we do instead? Particularly when we're trying to migrate customers' environments to the cloud, which we do regularly, and we want to do more regularly, we see it as an opportunity to improve. We want to get better. We try to do it more often than just at the end of the project. If there's any converts to Agile here, Scrum tells you to do a retrospective, which is a lessons learned at the end of every sprint. We try to pick just the key things, not everything. And then where we put it is in a standard operating procedure, or we have a template project plan now for migrating customer environments to the cloud. So there's probably over 100 items in there that we've gathered over the years. We use that as a template project plan for every project. They won't all apply to every project. A lot of the tasks say consider this, consider that. And then Six Sigma Lean Scrum, I wouldn't claim that Fordway is a total Six Sigma shop or a Scrum shop, or even want to, but what we have done is go through those methodologies and frameworks and picked out the key techniques and tools that work for us. So what have we learned from the many migrations that we've conducted? We've put together a template project plan that I mentioned. There's about 4 stages: discovery, or learning the customer and the customer site, planning stage, execution, go live. What I'm going to do is I've just picked out 2 or 3 from each. So in discovery, comment on complicated IT. At Fordway, we can do a very basic migration to an Azure subscription, but our key skill is migrating complicated environments. So these are environments that have lived a little. They've been around for a while. They were designed for a purpose. They've evolved. They've changed. Things have been bolted on, and we're now considering migrating to the cloud. What we need to do is get those brutal facts out right at the beginning. It doesn't help to find that halfway through that there are some gremlins in the system. Often we find ourselves providing a service or providing support for these environments once migrated. So as well as learning about the environment, we want to learn about the customer. So we're trying to find out their culture, what the business is, what the IT department is like, what is the focus? Is the priority reducing costs? Is the priority minimizing user impact? Is it functionality? What's the risk appetite? Once we gather all of that, then we can tailor our service to the customer. Planning stage, I've mentioned network. For anybody in the room who's not a networker, networking is always the problem, correct? If you've got an incident, it's always network, it's always connectivity. Anybody in the room who is a networker, networking is always the solution. But seriously, we find with these projects, network is usually the biggest cause of delay. So we try and get on top of that day one. Third parties, similar thing. We found that, I mean, they're all different, these projects. Some third parties, they may survive the migration. Some third parties, maybe their responsibility will end and hand it over to somebody else. The key thing is to understand the roles and responsibilities right at the beginning. It can be another cause of delay and grief if you don't get that tied down right at the beginning. And please have a hard deadline. It may sound counterintuitive for a project manager to ask for a hard deadline, but it concentrates people's minds. If you've got to get out of a building, if you've got to get out of a data center, you've got a hard deadline, it can't be moved, everybody's focused. If you don't have that, things can drift. Execution. This is where the standard solutions kick in, particularly if we're deploying to or migrating to the Fordway private cloud. We have standard solutions for server builds, etc. POC, pilot, UAT, penetration test. I mention these because these can all reduce or manage risk, but they all cost and they all take time. So it all depends on these projects. They're all different. The level of data and the confidentiality required, etc., it's all different. So it's not essential to do all of these things. Finding the right balance. And I mentioned Scrum before, daily Scrums, reviews, they're really good at this stage. This is where the gremlins will come out, so we can share the information and get decisions made. Finally, the handover. So before going live, we want to test everything. And then during these projects, we typically gather a huge amount of technical information, but it's not practical to maintain it in a go-live situation. So what we do is we try and boil it down to something that is manageable, and really following the principle that a technical document which has wrong information is probably worse than not having any documentation at all. We do the same thing with the service charter, an Untitled document, so that describes the service and the SLAs, etc. And then if you go through one of these with Fordway and you want your name in lights, we'll be very happy to do a case study with you. So that's the last slide. I'll just summarize by saying we're on a journey, we're still learning, and every one of these we intend to get better.